You ever see a woman in a rhinestone t-shirt that says, Civic Peace Unit beat a mailbox to death like it owed her money? Because that's how my Saturday started. No warning, no knock, not even a passive-aggressive note, just a full-on sledgehammer assault at 8:04 a.m. MI on what was supposed to be a peaceful morning. There I was, sipping my coffee, minding my business on my front porch, when I heard 3 loud bangs that made me think someone had dropped a bowling ball off a roof. By the time I looked up, my black metal mailbox, a perfectly boring box, I might add, was split open like a busted piñata, and this lady with a clipboard and a headband that said enforcer was yelling something about community standards. I thought maybe this was a prank, like some extreme HOA hazing ritual, but no, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mr. Dalton, you are in violation of Mailbox Code 7B, subsection 12.4. This is your final notice." Final? Lady, I didn't even get a first. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. Now let's back up for a second. I'm Hank Dalton. I'm 62, retired early from the auto repair business after 38 years of honest work and busted knuckles. Moved to Camden Ridge for one reason: quiet. I picked a one house on the block with no HOA tag attached, no power-tripping yard patrol, just a solid little fixer-upper with a crooked fence and a lawn that minded its own business. That mailbox she destroyed? It came with the place, probably older than my mortgage. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't meant to be. I don't need a mailbox that sings or dances or matches the exact Pantone shade of the HOA president's toenail polish. I just need one that holds bills and the occasional fishing catalog. Apparently that was too much to ask. So this woman who introduced herself as Carolyn Prim, president of the Civic Peace Unit, mind you, starts waving a wrinkled fine notice like it's a search warrant. She says I owe $2,500.00 for non-compliance, plus late fees, plus an incident surcharge because I didn't immediately surrender the mailbox. I asked her calmly, is this a joke? She said no. She said, "Sir, enforcement is not a laughing matter." And then, as if to prove her seriousness, she pointed to a hand-drawn logo on her shirt, looked like an eagle done in Microsoft Paint, and told me she had authority granted by the Community Governance Charter. Never heard of that? Neither had I. It sounded like something invented between episodes of a true crime podcast and a bottle of rosé. The funniest part, if you can call it that, is she wasn't alone in this delusion. Across the street, old Mrs. Ruthie was filming the whole thing from behind her garden gnome. Mr. Odom, the school teacher, had his blinds half open and his phone clearly pointed in our direction. This was a full-blown HOA crime scene reenactment, except there was no HOA and no crime, unless you count aggravated mailbox murder. When Carolyn finished her speech, she stomped back to her Civic, which had a Comic Sans bumper sticker reading HOA enforcement vehicle, and peeled off like she was escaping a getaway. I picked up the notice she dropped on my porch, half wet with coffee stains, and printed in size 16 Arial, and read the reason for the violation. Mailbox aesthetic inconsistent with community harmony guidelines. What does that even mean? My mailbox wasn't playing loud music, it wasn't painted neon green, it was just there. But here's the part Carolyn Prim didn't know. While she was swinging that hammer like she was auditioning for a demolition derby, I had my phone in my hand, and I recorded every second, every swing, every threat, every mention of Section 12 point whatever. Ruthie filmed it too. So did Mr. Odom. She had an audience, all right, and not a sympathetic one. That video became my insurance policy, because in that moment something inside me shifted. This wasn't about the mailbox anymore. This was about the principle, about not letting some clipboard-wielding fantasy cop shake down a retired man for money with no badge, no law, and no right. And as I stood on my porch holding that broken fine notice and looking at the remains of my very innocent mailbox, I decided I wasn't just going to clean up the pieces. I was going to clean house. Carolyn thought she could scare me into silence, but the thing about people like her? They don't expect pushback. They count on good folks staying quiet. And I'd never been good at staying quiet. The next morning, after I swept up the last of my mailbox and brewed the strongest pot of coffee I'd made since 1998, I sat down at my kitchen table and started typing. Camden Ridge HOA boundary map. That's all I needed. One search, one map, one quiet confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. See, Carolyn's whole performance the day before had all the theatrics of a Shakespearean villain with a clipboard, but something deep in my gut, the same gut that once told me not to buy a Chevy Vega in '74, was telling me she was full of it. So I followed that instinct. And wouldn't you know it, according to the interactive parcel map on the county assessor's site, my house wasn't just outside the HOA, it was bright red on the map with 3 capital letters stamped across it, NOA, non-OA, just like I'd signed for when I bought the place, just like I'd told the realtor, just like I'd expected. Now I had proof. But here's the thing about folks like Carolyn. They don't just bend the truth, they turn it into balloon animals. You think you know what you're looking at, but somehow it's wearing a hat and barking like a dog. Of course, knowing I was right didn't calm me down. It made me curious, like, how many other people did this woman fine without checking facts? I called up my realtor, Gwen, who's been in the game for 20 years and doesn't mince words. Hank, she said, I sold you that house specifically because it's not in the HOA. You made me triple-check that, remember? You said you'd rather fight a raccoon with a flashlight than deal with another HOA president? She wasn't wrong. Gwen pulled up her old notes and even sent me a copy of the deed with the exemption clause highlighted in neon pink. I thanked her and asked if she'd heard of the Civic Peace Unit. She laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Sounds like a band from the '70s. Never heard of it. That laugh stuck with me, because if the real estate world thought this thing was a joke, then why did it feel like my neighborhood was under siege by a fake HOA militia with homemade logos? Something wasn't adding up, and I wasn't about to let it go. So I took it a step further and made a call to the county clerk's office. After 2 transfers and 1 very confused intern, I finally got a woman named Doris on the line. Doris sounded like she'd smoked a pack a day since Reagan was in office and had the patience of a retired school bus driver. You said Civic Peace Unit? She asked. Ain't nothing official by that name on our books, hun. I explained what had happened. Mailbox murder, clipboard fines, midnight texts, and Doris let out this long, wheezy sigh. That sounds like Carolyn Prim again. That word, again, hung in the air like a porch light buzzing with bad news. Doris told me that Carolyn had once been part of the actual Camden Ridge HOA, but had been removed 2 years ago after several code enforcement incidents, and something vague about unauthorized lawn inspections. She said she thought being on the HOA board meant she was queen of the cul-de-sac. It was like finding out your local meter maid used to be the sheriff, until she got caught ticketing wheelbarrows. I thanked Doris, hung up, and sat in silence for a minute. This wasn't just a neighbor being nosy. This was something deeper, something much weirder. Here's what got me. Everyone I talked to knew something about her, some off-the-record story, some chuckle, some eye roll, and yet she was still out here, collecting money, tearing down mailboxes, and quoting fake regulations like they came straight out of the Federal Register. Why? Because no one had pushed back. That's the real power of people like Carolyn. They don't actually have authority. They just speak with enough confidence that folks don't think to ask for ID. Her clipboard was like a sword made of paper cuts. Official-looking nonsense that terrified just enough people to make her feel powerful. She didn't need the law. She just needed your fear. And that realization right there made the hair on my arms stand up. I wasn't just dealing with a bully. I was dealing with a con artist who wore self-importance like a badge and used confusion as her weapon of choice. That kind of person doesn't stop because you show them a map. They stop when the people around them stop being afraid. And suddenly, I wasn't. So I printed everything out, parcel map, deed records, even the email Gwen sent me, and put it all in a neat little folder I labeled Operation Clipboard Crackdown. I knew I had the facts on my side, but now I needed backup. I needed to find out if I was the first person Carolyn had pulled this on, or just the first who'd fought back. My next stop? Ruthie across the street, and Mr. Odom next door. If my instincts were right, and they usually are when coffee and injustice are involved, I wasn't the only one with a broken mailbox and a head full of questions. And if that was true, Carolyn's little fake empire was built on sand. I didn't know exactly what I was about to uncover, but I had a feeling it was going to be bigger, messier, and stranger than anything I'd imagined. Stay with me. This rabbit hole's just starting to open. So now I had the truth, the paperwork, and a folder full of receipts. But something told me this wasn't just about me and one busted mailbox. Carolyn Prim wasn't enforcing rules. She was enforcing fear, and I was about to find out just how many folks had paid the price. Trust me, what I uncovered next, it'll make your blood boil and your lawn signs glow. If you've ever tangled with HOA madness or smelled a scam in your own neighborhood, you're going to want to hear the next part. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens when I start knocking on doors and uncover a pattern so twisted it could pass for fiction if it wasn't all true. You ever knock on a neighbor's door just hoping for a casual chat and end up with a 3-hour therapy session and a plate of lemon bars? That was Ruthie. Sweet as pie, tough as roofing nails, and sharper than any lawyer I've ever hired. When I asked her if Carolyn had ever tried to fine her, she didn't even blink. Tried? Honey, she came after me for having too many bird feeders, said it created migratory chaos. I kid you not, migratory chaos. Ruthie leaned in close, voice low like we were plotting something illegal. But that wasn't the worst. You remember Mr. Albright, lived 3 doors down, real quiet guy, retired mailman? I nodded. She hit him for gravel violations, said his driveway was an unauthorized tope. He ended up selling the place and moving in with his niece in Idaho. That one sat heavy. We weren't talking about people bending rules, we were talking about people being broken by fake ones. So I made a list. Names, addresses, dates. By noon, I had a notebook full of Carolyn's past victims. Some were too embarrassed to talk. Some were too mad to stop talking. There was a young mom on Willow Lane who got fined for her daughter's sidewalk chalk drawings. Apparently, unicorns and hopscotch weren't community approved. Then there was Vince, a widower who got charged $150.00 a week for non-conforming flower bed his wife had planted those roses 20 years ago. Carolyn said they violated sightline symmetry. Vince called it what it was, emotional theft. I called it something unrepeatable. Each story I heard made my blood simmer a little hotter, not just because she was stealing money, but because she was targeting the folks least likely to fight back. The elderly, single moms, people who didn't have time for clipboard drama. The kind of folks who pay just to make the problem go away. Carolyn wasn't enforcing order, she was harvesting fear, one fine at a time, and I'd finally seen enough. I spent that entire week calling every name Ruthie gave me. Every phone call turned into a testimony. The stories weren't just consistent, they were identical. Carolyn would show up unannounced, dressed in her fake authority gear, waving papers with made-up codes, demanding cash or checks made out to CPU services. If someone pushed back, she'd threaten liens, lawsuits, or escalated enforcement. In plain English, she'd scare them silent. A dozen different families had forked over money, anywhere from $50 to $3,000. One guy had given her $200 just to keep her from showing up during his daughter's birthday party. She weaponized embarrassment. She made your front lawn feel like a crime scene. And the more I heard, the clearer it became. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a one-woman operation dressed up like a government agency. By the time I tallied it all up, Carolyn had racked in over $22,000 in the past year. $22,000. That's not lawn fine money, that's felony money. And she hadn't just taken cash. She'd taken peace of mind, too. People were walking on eggshells in their own yards, afraid their wind chimes or flagpoles might trigger another compliance action. One couple told me they stopped decorating for Christmas altogether. Another covered their garden gnome in a tarp to avoid confrontation. Imagine that, hiding a gnome like it's contraband. Carolyn had turned our neighborhood into a minefield of imaginary rules, and nobody realized it until the damage was done. But now they knew. Now they were talking, and talking meant we were no longer alone. That shift, from silence to storytelling, was the real beginning of something. I could feel it. See, bullies thrive in corners. They operate best in the shadows, whispering threats that sound too ridiculous to repeat out loud. But once you drag their nonsense into the daylight, once enough people compare notes and realize they've all been conned by the same smile and clipboard, something flips. Fear turns into fire, and that's exactly what I saw in my neighbors' eyes. They weren't just angry, they were ready. I told them I'd organize everything. I had the timeline, the evidence, the pattern. I even had names for every fine code she made up. Mailbox harmony, gravel hue standards, community aesthetics clause 9. It was like she'd built a Monopoly game where she always got to be the banker. And now? The board was flipping. We were about to turn her made-up HOA into a real legal headache. What started with a smashed mailbox was now something bigger, louder, and a whole lot more dangerous. For her. I wasn't just collecting complaints. I was building a case. And the more I listened, the more determined I became to bring it all crashing down. Because Carolyn hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen peace, dignity, and in one case, someone's home. And if she thought this neighborhood was still too scared to speak up, she was about to find out what happens when the quiet ones start knocking back. Stick with me. What we uncovered next peeled the mask right off the clipboard queen. There's a fine line between landscaping and psychological warfare, and I mowed it in bold letters across my front yard. After hearing what Carolyn had done to my neighbors, I figured it was time to get a little creative. So I took my old riding mower out of retirement, filled her up with gas, and got to work turning my Bermuda grass into a billboard. By the time I was done, there was a 20-foot arrow shaved clean into the lawn, pointing straight down the block toward Carolyn's house, like the finger of God. And in the center of that arrow, I'd cut 3 perfect words into the turf. Not HOA. All caps, bold, easy to read, even if you were trying not to. If you were a drone pilot or an alien from space, you could still see that message loud and clear. I didn't need to argue with Carolyn. I just needed her to know the neighborhood wasn't buying her clipboard show anymore. And nothing says check your fantasy at the curb like yard art with attitude. But why stop there? I swung by the hardware store and picked up 4 weatherproof security cameras with blinking red LEDs, the kind that make people pause before stepping on your driveway. I mounted them at each corner of my house, all aimed outward like a surveillance fortress. And just to be clear about things, I stuck little signs beneath each one, real authority monitoring, not fake aha. Then came the crown jewel. An LED yard sign I programmed to flash rotating messages every 5 seconds. Scam-free zone. No clipboard queens beyond this point. Certified HOA-free property. The thing lit up my yard like Times Square. It was beautiful. Some folks hang Christmas lights in December. I staged a resistance movement in LED, and let me tell you, the reaction from the neighbors? Instant legend. Cars slowed down to read it. Ruthie brought me homemade banana bread. A kid from down the street asked if I could help him write "Free the Gnomes" on his front hedge. It was like our street got its spine back. Of course, Carolyn wasn't about to let the spotlight swing away without a tantrum. 3 days later, I heard the roar of lawn equipment outside and looked out my window to see a rogue landscaping crew hacking away at my arrow like they'd been paid in panic and Red Bull. They didn't just trim. It looked like they were prepping for a moon landing. My grass arrow, gone. My message, mulched. The crew chief handed me a printed invoice and said it was mandatory community groundskeeping, ordered by Civic Peace Unit Authority. I nearly laughed in his face. Instead, I pulled out my phone, hit record, and asked one simple question: who gave you permission to touch my property? He blinked, looked at the paper, and said, someone named Carolyn, and just like that, I had them on video admitting they were paid cash, had no permit, and didn't know who actually owned the land they were mowing. You could practically see the lawsuit drafting itself. Turns out Carolyn had made her biggest mistake yet. She thought erasing my message would erase the movement, but instead her stunt backfired like a leaf blower full of glitter. Within hours, the footage had made its way to every porch on the block. Neighbors who'd never spoken to each other were suddenly trading HOA horror stories over coffee and cookies. Mr. Odom made flyers that said, "Ask me about fake fines." Ruthie offered up her garage for a weekend meetup. Even the teenagers started helping out, recording videos, snapping pics, and sharing them on what they called neighborhood tea talk. It was like Carolyn had tried to stomp out a spark and accidentally set off fireworks. That's the thing about control freaks. They want silence, but all they end up doing is raising the volume. She wanted power. I gave her spotlight. Turns out the cockroach doesn't like center stage. For the first time since I moved to Camden Ridge, people weren't avoiding eye contact. They were knocking on doors, comparing notes, and standing taller. What began as a personal feud had grown into something bigger, a shared understanding that we weren't powerless. We'd been divided by fake rules and imaginary threats, and all it took to break the spell was one guy with a mower and a grudge. But I wasn't done. Carolyn had tried to mow away the message, so I decided it was time to grow something louder. Stick around. Next, we plant the kind of truth she can't cut down. She thought a lawnmower could erase the truth. What she didn't count on was a neighborhood finally wide awake and ready to push back. And trust me, when fake authority meets real unity, things get a whole lot messier and a whole lot more satisfying. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next, because in the next part, we're talking fake inspectors, midnight surveillance, and the moment I realized this wasn't just a scam, it was a full-blown delusion with a clipboard. You won't want to miss it. You ever look out your window and spot a stranger with a clipboard pretending to be important? Now imagine it happening 3 times in 1 week, with a different official each time, all armed with fake badges, bad breath, and an even worse understanding of county law. That was my life by Thursday. The first guy claimed to be from the building safety division, but when I asked to see his ID, he fumbled with a badge that looked like it came out of a Cracker Jack box and mumbled something about community-wide assessments. I asked what code I'd allegedly violated. He said, excessive structural freedom. I said, what does that even mean? He said, I'll be back with a supervisor. He left so fast he forgot his clipboard on my lawn, which, spoiler alert, had a blank form and a grocery list on the back. Yeah, real professional. But the fun didn't stop there. 2 days later, a woman in an orange vest showed up, claiming to be with County Environmental Services. She started taking pictures of my bushes. I walked outside and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, can I help you?" She said, "Just assessing for erosion hazards." My bushes. In the middle of a flat, grassy yard. I asked for her ID and she said it was in her car. I offered to follow her there. She bolted. I mean, full jog back to a nondescript sedan, which just so happened to be parked 1 street over. And parked right next to it, a very familiar Honda Civic. Beige, dented, and wearing that Comic Sans bumper sticker like a scarlet letter. HOA enforcement vehicle. I didn't need a warrant or a law degree to know who was pulling the strings. And the cameras? Oh, the cameras were gold. Every inspector visit, every weird conversation, every car parked too long, my 4 security cams caught it all, including, and this is where it gets real, footage of Carolyn sitting in her Civic during every fake inspection. Sometimes she was on the phone. Sometimes she was watching through binoculars. Once she was eating what looked like a chicken wrap while pointing at my roof like she was directing a tactical raid. I checked the timestamps. Every so-called official showed up within 15 minutes of Carolyn's car pulling up. Coincidence? That's not how clipboard conspiracies work. She wasn't just running a scam anymore. She was stage managing it like a community theater production of Law and Order HOA unit. The only problem? Her actors kept forgetting their lines and their licenses. But the real kicker came at 2:03 a.m. on a Friday. I was reviewing camera footage with a cup of decaf and a growing headache when I saw movement on my front lawn. There she was, Carolyn Prim, standing in the grass, talking into her phone like she was holding a press conference for an invisible army. "If he wins, they all rebel," she whispered harshly. "We'll have mailbox uprisings, lawn rebellions, grass statues. I kid you not. Grass statues." Then she paused, switched the phone to her other hand, and paced like a supervillain monologuing before the third act twist. "Community standards must be preserved," she muttered. "Authority must be feared. Otherwise, what are we even guarding?" That's when I realized she wasn't just pretending anymore. She believed this. All of it. This wasn't fraud with a clipboard. It was cosplay with delusions of grandeur. A few nights later she returned, but this time the performance had props. Carolyn walked onto her own lawn, set up a ring light, pointed her phone at her face, and started filming what looked like a video diary. Except it wasn't for her. She was trying to fake threats. She played recordings of angry voices, then paused and acted like she was reacting to something I'd said. "No, Mr. Dalton, I won't step off the property," she shouted, even though I was inside my house with the blinds closed. Then she waved a stick in the air and knocked over her own potted plant, gasping like she'd just been shoved. "He's escalating. He's violent," she screamed to no one. It was part drama club, part fever dream, and my cameras caught every frame. It wasn't just ridiculous, it was dangerous. She wasn't trying to convince the community anymore. She was building a case for some twisted reality where she was the hero and I was the threat. And if she was willing to fake that much, what was she willing to do next? That's what scared me. It had started with fines and fake laws, then came the threats, the sabotage, the phony inspectors, but now? She was rewriting the whole story, casting herself as the protector and me as the enemy of order. She wanted so badly to be in charge that she'd created her own little dictatorship in a quiet American suburb. And now it was spiraling into something no one could ignore. My porch was no longer just a place for coffee. It was a front-row seat to a breakdown. But I wasn't giving up, and I wasn't backing down, because the next part, that's when we hit the gas. Carolyn thought the clipboard gave her control, but the thing about illusions, they vanish fast when the whole town starts watching. And trust me, the town was watching. Stick around, because what came next made the long sign look like an opening act. It all came down to one night, one meeting. I rented the community hall, sent out invites, and crossed my fingers that people would show up. What happened next blew me away. Nearly 30 neighbors packed into that little room, more than I ever expected. They came with stories, with scars, with a shared look that said, "We've had enough." There was Ruthie, her eyes steady, clutching her bird feeder like a battle standard. There was Vince, the widower, still clutching his rose pruning shears like a sword. And then there was Frank, a Vietnam vet with hands that trembled but a voice like a freight train. He told us how Carolyn had pushed his brother-in-law, an 82-year-old man, into selling the home he'd lived in for 30 years, only to pass away 6 weeks later, a broken man haunted by threats over the color of his mailbox. The room was heavy with silence, then murmurs of sorrow, then a quiet determination. We weren't just fighting a fake HOA anymore. We were fighting for our homes, our dignity, and each other. The night had become more than a meeting. It was a reckoning. Just when the mood was thick with shared pain and hope, the doors burst open like a bad soap opera climax. Carolyn stormed in, wearing her signature Civic Peace Unit t-shirt like it was armor, flanked by 2 guys wearing matching shirts that said enforcement. Her eyes scanned the room like a general surveying a rebellion, but instead of fear, she found something much worse: laughter. Not the polite kind, but the belly laughs of people who've seen through the smoke and mirror. Tom Wilson, a neighbor with a voice as loud as a judge's gavel, stood up and said, "Lady, we know you're a fraud. We know you've got no authority. And guess what? We're done playing along." One by one, neighbors stood, forming a wall of defiance. Carolyn's confident facade cracked. Her words stumbled, and for the first time she looked like the scared woman behind the clipboard. That was our moment, the moment when the tyranny of a fake queen fell before a united community. But the night wasn't over yet. Enter Deputy Renee Torres. She didn't just walk in, she commanded the room with a calm authority that made even Carolyn's two enforcers reconsider their life choices. Renee surveyed the scene, nodded at the crowd, then turned to Carolyn. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." The words hit like a judge's hammer. Carolyn tried to protest, citing fake rules and imaginary conspiracies, but Renee had all the evidence she needed. Months of surveillance footage from my cameras, testimonies from neighbors, and a statewide investigation that showed Carolyn was no stranger to this scam. She'd pulled the same con in 2 other counties, netting tens of thousands in fake fines. Fraud, harassment, extortion, filing false documents. The charges stacked up like a tower ready to collapse. As Carolyn was led away in cuffs, the room erupted, not with anger, but relief. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was happening. The story didn't end with an arrest. Local news outlets picked up the coverage, spotlighting the brave community that refused to be bullied. Interviews, footage, headlines that screamed, "Neighborhood defeats fraudster." Our little town was suddenly a beacon for others facing similar scams. We didn't just celebrate, we organized. A real committee formed, tasked with keeping watch, educating neighbors and preventing future fraud. And me? Well, the neighborhood had one last surprise. At a small ceremony on my front porch, the HOA board, real this time, installed a brand new mailbox. Not just any mailbox, but a custom one with a polished bronze plaque that read, "Henry Dalton, Guardian of Camden Ridge." I never thought I'd be famous for a mailbox, but hey, stranger things have happened. As for Carolyn, rumor has it she packed up and moved to New Mexico, probably trying to start her clipboard circus all over again. If she's out there fining cactuses for improper prickliness, I hope those cactuses know how to fight back, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes a busted mailbox is the beginning of a movement. And sometimes all it takes is a crooked clipboard to unite a neighborhood, spark courage, and remind us all that justice is real, especially when a community stands together. If you've ever felt powerless against bullies or fake authorities, remember this story. Stand up, speak out, and don't let anyone tell you your home isn't worth fighting for. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey. And trust me, the next story, it's just as wild. So hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss a single twist. And there it was. The moment when everything clicked. Standing there, mailbox gleaming, surrounded by neighbors who'd gone from strangers to a family, I realized this story was never just about me or Carolyn's clipboard. It was about what happens when people refuse to be intimidated, when a community chooses courage over fear, and when ordinary folks stand up and say, "Not here. Not to us." This isn't just a tale about a mailbox or a scam. It's a reminder that power isn't about who waves the biggest clipboard or shouts the loudest. True power comes from standing together, knowing your rights, and fighting for the respect every homeowner deserves. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that no matter how small or isolated you feel, your voice matters. When one person stands firm, they give others the strength to stand with them. And that's how change happens. Carolyn thought she was untouchable, but she underestimated what a united neighborhood can do. So if this story hit home, if it gave you that spark of hope or made you think twice about your own battles, do me a favor, hit that like button, share your own HOA horror stories or victories in the comments. Let's keep this conversation alive, because there are more people out there who need to hear that they're not alone. And if you want to join us for more unbelievable tales where justice, humor, and a little bit of grit come together to take down the bullies and the scammers, don't forget to subscribe. We've got plenty more stories coming your way, each one packed with twists, lessons, and that kind of satisfaction that only comes when the little guy wins. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the smallest mailbox can hold the biggest victory.